It is good to see everyone this evening. Hope everyone had a pleasant and a good afternoon. I was thinking about the subject of friendship this past week, and we're going to be looking in Proverbs tonight. We're going to be looking specifically in Proverbs chapter 27. In Proverbs 27. In Proverbs chapter 27, just happens to be a chapter that mentions friendship more than once. But no doubt throughout our lives, we have had many friends. No doubt you have had many friends. And it may be that you have lost friends along the way. Perhaps it's just a time and circumstances change and causes you to drift apart from your friends. It happens. Sometimes things happen and you just simply can't be friends with a person anymore. And you may have to burn that bridge, and the only question is how much gasoline you pour on that bridge. But sometimes that happens as well, and you just simply can't be friends with a person. That situation does happen from time to time, as sad as it is. But like I said, Proverbs 27 has a good bit to say about friends, and it brings up the subject more than once. We're going to begin by looking in chapter 27 at verse 1. It says, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth." It may sound familiar to a verse in the book of James. Verse 2, "Let another man praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips. A stone is heavy, and sand is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. Wrath is cruel, and anger a torrent, but who is able to stand before jealousy? Open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." You might see that there's actually a thread throughout even those seemingly random verses, as it talks about that a fool's wrath is weighty, and then as it talks about wrath is cruel. But then verse 5, "Open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed." But then we have verse 6, "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful." As we think about that idea, sometimes our friends have to speak straightly with us. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. It's actually an odd verse, and it's at least what we have to do is look at the verse and understand what it's saying, that our friends do have to speak straightly with us. And sometimes our friends have to rebuke us. And our friends tell us that we're wrong. And frankly, it hurts us. It wounds us. That's the idea. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. That our friend wants what is best for us, but as they speak straightly with us, it does wound us. But these are not the wounds of an enemy. These are the wounds of a friend, and they are not the same thing. The wounds of an enemy are meant to destroy, but the wounds of a friend are faithful. It is for our benefit. There is a reason. I've never had surgery in my life. I'm not looking forward to getting older. I'm not looking forward to the first time I have to go under a surgeon's scalpel. And I'm not looking forward to it because it hurts. There you go. That's real newsflash, isn't it? Even when you go to a surgeon, it is still described as a wound. Now, is it the wound of an enemy? No, they are trying to do what is best. Maybe something has to be removed, maybe something has to be repaired, whatever the case may be, but it wounds us. Here, as we think about faithful are the wounds of a friend, it cuts us and it wounds us, but it is good for us. And to think about the verse, to look specifically at verse 6, which would you rather have in your life? Would you rather have the faithful wounds of a friend who is trying to help you, or would you rather have the kiss of a Judas who is full of deceit? Which would you rather have in your life? Because that's the picture. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Do you remember when Judas came to Jesus in the garden and how Judas greeted him? Greeted him with a kiss. And of all the things Jesus says there, you remember the first word out of Jesus' mouth? He says, "Friend, why have you come?" As you think about how Jesus looked at Judas, and you think about the fact that Jesus had washed Judas's feet, when Judas came and kissed Jesus, was that the kiss of a friend? No, that was the sign, is what it was. So what would you rather have in your life? Would you rather have the wounds of a friend, faithful are the wounds of a friend, or would you rather have the kiss of someone who is full of deceit? Not all wounds are faithful, okay? Not all wounds are faithful. There are those who are simply trying to hurt people. Those are not the wounds of the faithful. But when we're dealing with our friends and our friends are dealing with us, we need to have good friends, and we need to be good friends. And sometimes we just want our friends to agree with us and to tell us everything is okay and to not tell us that there's a problem. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Come on to verse 8 now. In verse 8 it says, "Like a bird that wanders from its nest is a man who wanders from his place. Ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. Do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away." Calamity does come. Bad times do happen. And it looks like the point of the passage is, better is a friend nearby. We have an advantage now. My family and I have an advantage because now we're just about an hour and a half away from family. If I needed my family, if I needed, for example, my brother to be down here tonight, could he do it? Yeah, he could do it. About an hour and a half away. When you're in northern Louisiana and you need help right now, could he just drop everything he's doing and come right now? The point of the passage is, better a friend who's nearby than family members who are far away. Better someone nearby who can help right now in the day of calamity than family who is far away that might not be able to help. That's the idea. And the point is that we should keep our friends close. We should keep our friends close because we will need them in bad times. We should keep our friends close, and we should not forsake them. Do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend. I understand, like I said, sometimes you have to part company with people. I understand that. But you don't have to part company needlessly. And unfortunately, that is what happens sometimes. Sometimes relationships and friendships suffer needlessly. And they suffer a lot of times simply through neglect. That idea of forsaking. And the friendship just comes to nothing. That's the idea. Other times friendships suffer because you might look at the tail end of verse 9. And the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. Sometimes friends don't like that counsel. They don't like that advice. And as we speak, we should speak as the oracles of God, and sometimes folks don't like that. And the friendship may dissolve, frankly, and people may end up being friends no more. But the overall point that I wanted to make, that I think the passage is making, is we should be careful how we treat our friends. That's the point. We should be real careful how we treat our friends, because guess who we might need in the day of calamity? We might need our friends. And if we forsake them, if we neglect them, then in the day of our calamity, what are we left with? We're all alone, right? We're friendless. Family may not be there as well. So that's the idea. Keep our friends close because we will need them in all likelihood in the day of calamity. Verse 14 now. He who blesses his friend with a loud voice rising early in the morning, it will be counted a curse to him. I would suggest even the best of friends have to do something. And what even the best of friends have to do is they have to respect each other's boundaries. They have to. Okay? To think about this idea, perhaps you've had friends that have had trouble with that. A proverb that comes to mind a little earlier, come back to chapter 25. In chapter 25 at verse 17. Chapter 25 verse 17 says, "Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you." Is there a time to visit? There's a time to visit, right? There is a time to set foot in your neighbor's house. I have a friend who I mention pretty often, and I talk to him once a week. Once a week. And that's the quota. And I had to put those boundaries in, because if I didn't put those boundaries in, he would call me once a day, if not more than once a day, and he would want to talk for 2 or 3 hours. And I love him, and he's my friend, and we are brethren in Christ, and he's a fellow preacher. But the bottom line is, at some point, we aspire to lead a quiet and peaceable life, and according to Thessalonians, we mind our own business. And frankly, I have work to do, and I feel like he has work to do, and I have family, and he has family. And therefore we recognize, hopefully, what the verse says. Verse 14 back in chapter 27, "He who blesses his friend with a loud voice rising early in the morning, it will be counted a curse to him." If you call me at 5:30 in the morning, whoo, it's a running joke, and pardon me if my crassness causes you trouble. If you call me at 5:30 in the morning, someone better be dead. And if they're not dead already, they'll be dead when I'm done. Don't call me at 5:30 in the morning unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, call. Don't call late at night unless it's an emergency. If it's an emergency, call. I have had brethren, not here, down south, I've had brethren in times past call me because they had a toothache at 10:30 at night. And the first words out of my mouth were, "I am not a dentist. You're going to call me about a toothache at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and we were in bed?" And you might, there's a parable that speaks about such things. But we have to respect each other's boundaries, is what we have to do. And the verse says what it says, that even if you're friends, if you're a nuisance, you will be counted as a curse. We have to do what the Thessalonians passage says. We have to mind our own business, and that's 1 Thessalonians 4 at verse 11 that speaks about such things as that. So along with the ideas about faithful are the wounds of a friend, and keeping our friends close and not forsaking them, and respecting each other's boundaries, we also, of course, have verse 17. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Concerning the sharpening, friends sharpen each other. Will the sparks sometimes fly? The sparks will sometimes fly. But if we don't sharpen one another, then what happens? If we don't sharpen one another, then we just become dull. What good is a dull edge? It's like trying to cut through a loaf of bread with a blunt knife. What happens? You just smash the bread, you end up not cutting anything, and you just end up mangling it. But that's what happens if we don't sharpen each other, that we get dull, we get nicked up. We lose our edge is what happens. And there's a passage, and go and be turning to the New Testament. Come to Galatians as we think about sharpening each other, and it's Galatians chapter 4. A verse came to mind in thinking about these ideas about friendship. In Galatians 4, Paul was dealing with a certain problem that was happening in the church in Galatia. And it was happening other places as well. The overall problem was you had the Judaizers, and you had folks who were starting to buy into it, thinking that effectively you could have a hybridized version of Christianity, that you could obey both the Old and the New Covenant. Anyway, and that's what Galatians, big part of it, is all about. But in dealing with all of that issue in Galatians chapter 4 at verse 16, Paul makes this comment. He says, "Have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth?" And you know what happens pretty often? You tell the truth, and you become the person's enemy. As we go through 1 Corinthians, and I haven't decided if we're going to go through 2 Corinthians as well, but I think we've already read the verse at the end of 2 Corinthians when Paul says, "The more that I love, the less that I am loved." And it's the same concept. He's dealing with different issues, but it's the same concept. It's the same concept as here in Galatians. Have I become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Verse 20 here in chapter 4, "I would like to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you." Usually we don't think of the church in Galatia, the churches in Galatia, falling into that boat, but there it is, as Paul speaks about it. If we don't sharpen each other, then what ends up happening is we get nicked up, we lose our edge. And I was just thinking about this picture of, it's like a decorative knife or a decorative sword. What good is a decorative, y'all have seen those, like a sword on a mantle, sometimes they're just decorative. What good is a sword that doesn't have a sharp edge on it? It's pretty to look at. Okay, what else? It has no purpose other than that. It's just pretty to look at. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't cut anything. It doesn't cut anything. Sometimes, and this sort of ties in with our first point, sometimes all folks want are yes men. They want a personal amen corner. And every time, they just want someone to agree with everything they say. I remember in times past, and I'm about to sort of reveal my age a little bit. Not that old, but getting older. Y'all remember when Mike Tyson first started getting in legal trouble? And as he was being investigated for all sorts of things, one of the things that came out was about his entourage that always traveled with him. And within his entourage that he was supporting, he was paying a man $50,000 a year to be a yes man. His only job was, when Mike said, "Should I do this?" his job was to say, "Yes, sir, you should." That was his only job. How well did that work out for Mike? Got in trouble with a lady, bit a fella's ear off in the ring, did all sorts of things. I wonder if anybody ever told him, "Mike, I don't think that's a good idea." I don't know. Don't know. But that's how we can be sometimes. Sometimes we don't sharpen each other like we should. And we get dull, blunt, and we don't want the imperfections worked out. And when we do that, we don't want the verse in Proverbs, "As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the counsel of his friend." Go ahead and come to John chapter 15, where the scripture reading was a moment ago. Because the Lord spoke about, in John chapter 15 is where we're going, the Lord spoke about friendship, and he actually speaks about it throughout the passage. But in John chapter 15, at the top of the chapter, you have the picture of the vine and the vine dresser. Verse 1, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. You will be my disciples, so you will be my disciples. As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, for all things that I heard from my Father I have made known to you. Verse 17, these things I command you, that you love one another. Verse 18, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Did you see within that passage where the wounds of the faithful are? And it's there in verse 2. Every branch that does not bear fruit, what does the Lord do? He takes it away. But every branch that does bear fruit, he just leaves it alone, right? No, he prunes it. I was talking, me and Miss Arlene, we got a relationship right now. Miss Arlene's the flower lady. She knows all about the roses. So she's trying to help me because I need all the help I can get with my roses. And as those roses are blooming, she was telling me this morning about the secret about when it's time to deadhead them, that after they bloom, you go down 5 leaves and you trim the plant right there. Now, why do you prune that branch? Because you want it to bloom more. This is not a tangent. I'll just tell you what happened. The roses that we have are those, they're just the cheap ones from Walmart or Lowe's or whatever. And they're the knockout roses. And those knockout roses are advertised as ever blooming, and you don't have to deadhead them. Okay? That's how they're advertised. Never fall for advertising. Right? So, but because you're never supposed to deadhead them, I thought, hey, that's great. No maintenance. So I never deadheaded them. And about a month and a half ago, they got done with their first bloom, and then they were done. It's like, well, I guess they're just done for the year. Like, well, they really shouldn't be done for the year. So lo and behold, the kids and Jennifer, they went out, and guess what they did, despite what the advertising said? They deadheaded them. They pruned them, right? And lo and behold, guess what happened? They bloomed. Why does the Lord prune even the branch that bears fruit? Because the Lord of harvest is looking for fruit. The branch that bears no fruit, and that's the butterfly bush that I told a few folks about, dead as a doornail. And I could prune that all day long, and you know what would happen? It's dead as a doornail. So you know what I did? I jerked it out of the ground. Why does it take up the space? Right? If something's dead as a doornail, you jerk it out. If something's dead as a doornail, every branch that does not bear fruit, he takes away. But every branch that bears fruit, he prunes. Does the plant suffer a little bit of shock when it is first pruned? You are cutting away a part of the plant. You are taking the sharpened shears to it. But are the wounds of a friend faithful? Right? The Lord knows what he's doing. And it may hurt to be pruned, but it is for our benefit and it is for his glory. So I would suggest there are the wounds of the faithful. Does calamity come? I think very much so. As we think about this passage in John chapter 15, does the Lord work with us as he worked with his disciples, right? Sharpening us, rebuking us, if need be, and actually changing us. When he says, No longer do I call you servants, now I call you a friend. Because servants, they don't know what their master's doing, do they? Right? They're just hirelings. That's what they are. The Lord hires you, and you just do what the Lord tells you to do. And a lot of times that's how it is when we first become Christians. You just do what the Lord tells you to do, and you trust that He knows what's best for you, and you recognize and you respect His authority. You are His servant. But the longer we follow Him, the relationship grows. And as He cultivates us, and as iron sharpens iron, and He counsels us, and we listen to Him, what happens to the relationship? It gets to the point where we're not servants, not to say that we don't serve, but now we're friends. Romans talks about the same thing, only it's backwards. It's backwards from this. In Romans chapter 6, when Paul said that he had to remind them, because that's the chapter where it starts out, shall we continue to sin that grace may abound? And he starts using the figure of a slave, and he says, I'm having to use these terms because of your weakness. So he's having to take them backwards. They're having to somewhat start over with that initial relationship of servants. But the Lord wants us to grow. And as you think about the growth of that relationship, and as we have rejoiced in Andrew and Addie's marriage, we'll talk about them since they're not here tonight. I was there the first time they met, and we all went to Dairy Queen up the road. And just in talking to Addie about it, and Andrew was there on our sofa within just this past week. It was last Sunday night, actually. And we were just talking about that event. And Addie basically said, how did we ever end up here after that first encounter at Dairy Queen? And how does it happen? It's because the relationship grows. And as we follow the Lord, the relationship grows. We start off as servants, and then it's friends, but eventually we have the picture that is described in Ephesians and in Revelation, and it's the bride of Christ. And that is a much more intimate relationship. And all of a sudden we appreciate the Lord. And our relationship with the Lord grows. But here, before Jesus goes to the cross, I wanted to close with that passage in John chapter 15, just because it amazes me. We know what's happening. The shepherd will be struck and the sheep will scatter. And yet before Jesus goes to the cross, he's talking about love and he's talking about his friends. And it's just a wonderful thing. He spoke of his friends and he spoke to his friends, and he talks about how the friendship is conditional when he says, you are my friends if. And he spoke to that several times. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. Verse 7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire and it shall be done for you. I think overall it is the picture of authority and fellowship and following the Lord. And we have his example. And his example is meant for us to look at verse 13 and verse 12 backwards. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. What was he calling them to do? That's verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. In laying down his life for his friends, he was giving them an example of how they needed to be thinking about one another, rather than what we spoke about this morning as they were arguing about greatness, arguing about who's going to sit here and who's going to sit there when you come in your kingdom. And the Lord says, no, that's not what greatness is. Greatness is serving. And greatness is laying down your life for your friends. This is what love looks like. Denying yourself for others. And we are his friends if we do whatever he commands us to do. The lesson is yours this evening. As we offer the invitation, as we think about friendship, and we think about working with each other, we think about counseling each other, and we think about as man speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. And hopefully we speak that, and hopefully we are able to receive that. As the iron sharpens the iron, it's both giving and receiving. And hopefully we are able to do that as we grow in the Lord and as we are friends together. Lesson is yours. If you're here this evening, if you're not a Christian, take advantage of the opportunity to follow the Lord and to come to Him and then to learn from Him what true friendship really is. The lesson is yours. If you're here tonight and need to respond, please come while we stand and sing the invitation.